This episode is sponsored by the Bridge to Recovery, a nonprofit program on 115 acres near Bowling Green, Kentucky, a tranquil place where they've been changing lives for over 40 years. Their people improve their quality of life by acknowledging past emotional wounds and healing from all forms of trauma. The CEO, Paul Hamlin, has been a friend of mine for 20 years. Call him directly at 858-945-7848. That's 858-945-7848, or you can learn more about the Bridge to Recovery by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting thebridgetororecovery.com. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
I'm Tiffany Wehrner, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
Gentry. Thanks for listening. This episode features a conversation with Tiffany Wehrner, who is a licensed mental health counselor and a radio show host over on the west coast of Florida. She's got a program called Moments of Clarity, which focuses on the stigma associated with mental health and mental health treatment. So, Tiffany's someone who a mutual friend connected me with a while back when I first started talking about doing this podcast. So we agreed to kind of get together, and I'd be on her show and she'd be on mine. So this interview took place a few days ago, and the next day I was on her show. So there's kind of a bonus episode that'll come out later in the week that is a recording of my interview on her radio show. So, had a great conversation. Tiffany's funny and, passionate, and you should check out her show. There will be links in the show notes. It's Moments of Clarity. It's twice a week, Thursday and Friday from noon to 1, on the radio in the Tampa area. It's also syndicated in a couple other states so far, New York and Texas. You can hear it live on Facebook. And it's also published as a podcast on all the different platforms. So I hope you enjoy it. Here you go, Tiffany Wehrner.
Just the product.
Good, Tom. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast. And, I look forward to being on your show tomorrow, which we just established that I'm going to be on your radio show tomorrow. So tell me about your radio show and what it is that you do day to day. What's your life look like?
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I have a private counseling center. It's called Safety Harbor Behavioral Health and Counseling Center. I opened it in 2014, the beginning of it. I'm going on, we're on 5 years now. And the whole point of the counseling center is I had worked in a psychiatric facility as a licensed therapist. It was very clinical, and you could tell it was a doctor's office with the lobby and everything. And a lot of my clients were coming in and saying that things like, I'm not crazy, I just need to talk to somebody, or I'm not crazy, but I kept hearing that. It was a theme over and over again. I could tell that they didn't want to, they felt a little bit stigmatized in coming into counseling, but they needed to work through something. Mm-hmm. And so I opened up Safety Harbor Behavioral Health and Counseling Center and made it less clinical looking, more comforting. And there's no medication providers, and where you can offer counseling in a non-intimidating way, and that people can feel welcome and less afraid to go seek help. Mm. And so I did that. And when I had the grand opening for Safety Harbor Behavioral Health and Counseling Center, I had joined the Chamber of Commerce of Safety Harbor, and they had a grand opening with a ribbon cutting. And WTAN, Tan Talk Radio, was there and asked if I would do a psychology show after I gave this speech, surprisingly. And so I did that. January 2015, I started Moments of Clarity, and it's on every Thursday and Friday from 12 to 1, and it's made it to about 7 a.m. FM stations, syndicated in 2 states.
Oh, wow. Where?
New York and Texas.
Okay. And you're
It's
based in the
worldwide
Tampa.
on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and then iTunes, iHeartMedia, Spreaker, Cast Now, and all the platforms you can listen to a podcast, pretty much. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited on how it's going, but it's been a long journey. So,
and you're all about destigmatizing mental health,
right? Well, because Tom, it's important for us to understand mental health. A lot of times, fear is the one thing that's the hardest thing to erase from somebody's mind, especially if there's trauma, other things. But not only that, there's a stigma attached to mental health where people have to be suicidal or at extreme or mentally quote unquote insane or things like that. And it's not really like that. And not only that, but if we really understand what other people around us are going through, the world can be a more compassionate place and empathetic. Let's say if somebody has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they could come across as interrupting a lot, but understanding what that means can come across and people would understand, oh, they don't know better. The intention's not there.
right?
When people are having mood swings for some reason, if their intent is not there, we can show a person a bit of compassion because sometimes a mental health problem is very scary for people and they need our support. So it's really important to end the stigma.
Yeah, because, my experience is, whenever there's shame involved, we could be going through something really, really difficult. And then on top of it, be ashamed of ourselves for struggling, which based on society's perceptions of this problem and how they respond to such things. And it makes it all that much harder to get help or to deal with an issue that you have because you have all this guilt and shame just because you have it. And it's terrible.
For sure.
So this is kind of like your mission in life now, right?
It started a long time ago. My first experience with the stigma on mental health myself was about when I was 18. And I woke up early one morning and I was fresh out of high school. I was just starting summer classes for college, but I'd still stayed at home. And I woke up one morning and I was going to go get ready for school. And I went to the bathroom and found my mom laying on the floor. She had a brain aneurysm and she died 7 days later.
Oh my gosh.
And she never woke up. And I had never experienced trauma like that before. And nor did any of my family, I don't think. And the trauma like that, especially with a teenager, but for anybody for that matter, but it can really impact a person's way of thinking. And obviously, I needed to go talk to somebody. And my father and my uncle were Marines in Vietnam. And they had 3 Purple Hearts, like my father did. First lieutenant, platoon leader. And my father died in 2001 from Agent Orange, and my uncle later on, they were best friends. And that's my mom's brother. So when I was having problems, I started a destructive path and I was angry and I didn't know how to handle it. And I had asked my dad if I could go talk to somebody, and immediately he said, "You're not crazy. You can get through this. You'll be fine." And I wasn't. I really wasn't okay. I was angry and I was self-destructing and I was young and I didn't understand what I was going through. And so then I went through college and decided to do counseling. I saw how trauma could really derail somebody's path in life,
Mm-hmm.
and especially if they don't get help. So I started to study psychology, and during that time, I went to counseling as well, and I saw such a change in myself and how things could have been if I didn't get help.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just how I was introduced to the stigma on mental health, is within even my own family. And it was terrifying to think that I was alone and I was feeling like that by myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So that's how it first started way back in the day. And I've been on a mission to help people understand what mental health is and to not be afraid of it. A lot of people are programmed to think that it's not something they need, or they're in denial, or they don't want to face their problems. And it just makes us more damaged in the long run. So that was my own experience with the first stigma on mental health. So,
well, it's something that has come up repeatedly on this show. I don't know. I guess this is, 22nd, 23rd episode that I'm working on right now. And
way to go.
Thank you. I've done it once a week.
What you're doing is amazing here.
Thank you. But, a lot of it's just based on, I want to hear people's stories. How did you become who you are? And, a lot of times I don't really, there'll be people who I find online on Instagram or on Facebook. Like, for example, there was an artist who I just happened to find his work. I was out in Texas, last summer and, ended up Googling him and learning about him, and eventually asked him to be on the podcast. And it ends up being this really great episode where, I couldn't have scripted it any better. He's talking about what he went through in his childhood, and there was a suicide attempt, and therapy saved his life. And if there's anything he can do to encourage guys, especially and that's just one example. And I've spoken to a lot of therapists too. Obviously they're concerned about the stigma, but all of us need help. It's just ridiculous that, the idea that we wouldn't get help when we need it is just crazy. And one of the things that it led me to do is I actually did an interview where, with my therapist. And of course she was very professional. She didn't talk about me being her client, when I recorded, but I revealed in the opening monologue that, this is my therapist. And I'm saying this because it's really stupid that this is a big deal. I think it's just really, really dumb that we shouldn't have to feel bad about getting help when we need help. And, for me, it's like, I can repair stuff around the house. I'm a carpenter. I can do all kinds of stuff like that. What I can't, I don't do plumbing. I'm not an electrician, and I don't really work on cars. So, when it's something I don't know anything about, I pay somebody to help me with it. And
Right.
Why wouldn't we do that with our psyche? Why wouldn't we do that with our emotions, with our sense of well-being? But, and I talk about this in that episode that, a while back I was talking to a friend of mine who was going through a significant life event, significant life change. And he's talking about it, and, it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. But I asked him, did you think about talking to anybody? And he said, well, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean talking to somebody? You mean like a therapist? And I was like, yeah, like, why not? And he's like, well, what makes you think I need a therapist? I'm like, yeah. And I'm telling him what I'm telling you right now. No, it's not that. It's just that, like, why wouldn't we take help when we can have it? And it bothered him. I mean, it could have turned into an argument if I was going to let it, but, see, that's just crazy to me. I don't know why I know, I don't know when it comes to marriage, divorce, especially significant relationship stuff. For me, those have been times in my life where I've gone to get help. I want feedback because, what I've seen in my life and my family is a lot of divorce.
Right.
And a lot of, I don't know if I would characterize them as unsuccessful relationships because I think they all have their purpose, but, definitely could be better, healthier. And, I wanted to learn how to have a healthy relationship. And a lot of it has been about me working out my own stuff. And so, and part of it is being a sober guy. I recognize very early on, this is about me continually getting better. This never stops. I have to keep improving and I have to keep learning about myself. So I've really embraced it. And I encourage other guys to do the same, other people, but especially guys, because guys more than women, I think, have a hard time with this stuff, but women too, just like you. Anyway, I'm talking a lot. You're the guest.
I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And, I've saved a lot of marriages with people coming in for help, and a lot of divorce counseling, and a lot of people have stayed in their relationships because they got help, not only just for marriage and couple counseling, but for themselves.
Right.
And sometimes when people work on themselves, the relationship gets better, because once we love ourselves and we pay attention to ourselves, we have more to give.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if you really think about it, one of the things I've learned in my life, having learned it in relationships, is that as human beings, we have all these needs, all sorts of, security needs, safety needs, nutritional needs, social needs. I mean, we all have this array of needs. And as a culture, I think a lot of times we just think that person who we choose is supposed to meet all those needs, when in reality, that's really a setup for failure. I mean, that is unrealistic to expect someone close to us to meet all of our needs like that. It's just ridiculous. Right? I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, to expect that from someone, that's what we fall in love for, is because someone kind of suits our personality.
Right. Right. But I think that's where a lot of relationship go off course, because we have unrealistic expectations. We don't take care of ourselves. That's what I'm getting at. Like, right. If I'm taking care of myself, then I don't need you to affirm me or do this or do that. I don't need as much from you, and you're free to be who you are. And then the two of us can come together and, and help each other and build something greater than the sum of the parts, Mm-hmm. I don't know. Here's a question I have for you something that kind of irks me, and I hear a lot about it now. When it comes to men's issues and women's issues, we tend to put things in a masculine or a feminine box. And especially when it comes to men and women relating with each other, or men dealing with men's issues, I hear a lot about the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine, which, okay, I don't have an issue with any of that. But one thing that really does bother me is the idea that emotions are feminine.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to think that guys shouldn't cry, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, of course there's that undercurrent. But I think part of the reason why it's there is because there's this idea that emotions are inherently feminine, and it's being, propagated. I mean, I hear people, in the helping profession talking about it all the time. Like, oh, you're dealing, this is your feminine side coming out. And in my head, I'm like, that's a crock of shit. No, we all feel. Why do emotions have to be feminine? That's part of the problem. If we're going to label them as feminine, what guy is going to want to experience them? People are going to keep saying there's something wrong with me for feeling this because, it's just right or wrong. It's not helpful for men to, I don't think, most men who I know, don't want to hear, oh, well, that's you getting in touch with your feminine side. I think most guys are like, well, screw that. Like, what are you talking about? Like, and what I try to focus on with guys, because I mostly work with guys, we avoid our feelings. We avoid our feelings. All of us do on some level. And in working with addiction, that's really what it's about. But take crying, for example. What is more courageous for a man to sit among a group of people, especially a group of men, and to pretend he doesn't hurt and to not experience his feelings out of fear? Is that more courageous? Or just taking a risk and being vulnerable and actually crying and in your mind thinking, you know what? I don't give a shit what any of these people think. I need to feel this. That's courage. That's courage to me. Not, the whole idea holding it in and not crying and all that. It's just a crock.
I think that it shows good self-esteem when someone's comfortable to be themselves in front of other people.
Right. And, and one of the things I've observed in people, at least I believe when you're really emotionally balanced, I think, you're more comfortable experiencing what you're feeling in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like one time I did an event with a bunch of alumni from this, facility I was working at and did a dinner, and I had invited this guy who's a support of mine. He's been sober forever, like 50 years at this point. And he's been a therapist for a really long time. And this young guy who was there, they were talking about what 12-step meetings they go to. And they were talking to my friend Jimmy, and they're talking about, oh, well, yeah, I went to that. I go to that. And, and Jimmy's asking about, well, what about Paul? How's Paul doing? And the guy tells him, well, that was my sponsor, and he died 2 weeks ago. And in that moment, Jimmy looked down into his lap, and he just sat there, and he cried. He cried immediately, right there in front of all these guys. And in my head, I'm thinking, yes. That's the power of example. That's what these guys, this is a guy who they respect and admire. And he's showing them in real time, like, I'm feeling my feelings. This is what you do. And it was so awesome to see that happen. And I just wish we need more of that. We need more of that. Definitely. Mm-hmm. As guys, can you tell I'm passionate about the stuff with guys?
Yeah, it seems like it's being prevalent. There's a lot of people that have come on my show as well that are saying that it's been rough as for them as abuse survivors or child abuse survivors, sexual abuse survivors, human trafficking survivors. They're ashamed to talk about it because that sexual abuse and that kind of thing is something that only happened to women.
Yeah.
And that they're trying to make a statement saying that it happens both ways. And that men should have a voice too.
Well,
be comfortable having it.
For me, I'll tell you, I was pretty, I think severely, I would say severely emotionally abused growing up. I'm the youngest of 8 kids. It was one of my 2 brothers. It was, constant, verbal abuse. When I say emotional abuse, my definition of emotional abuse is when someone is hurting you on purpose. That's what it means to me. And especially when it's someone who you love and who is supposed to love you, man, it hurts even all that much worse, because it's also a betrayal. And, the feelings that I went through over that, it's like,
was he older?
Yeah. So, I looked up to him. I mean, he was really, really cool, I thought. There was part of me that wanted to be like him. All I really wanted ever was to connect with him. I wanted to have a brother relationship with him. And it was just never possible. He just always talked down to me, talked to me like I was stupid. For years, at least a couple years, invariably when he would see me walking past him in the hallway or wherever it was in the house, it was either faggot or dickhead every single time I saw him for years. And it finally came to an end. I had a sister, one of my oldest sisters had moved. I grew up in Indiana, and she had moved to Tampa, and she hadn't been home for a while. And, about a year after she moved, she came home for a week, and she stayed. She's so much older than me. I had never lived under the same roof with her. She had kids of her own, but so she stayed under the same roof with me and my older brother and older sister, one of them, and my mom and dad. And so she witnessed this, and she went to my mom and said, "What the hell are you doing? Why are you letting him treat Tom that way?" And, that part of it stopped. The dickhead, the faggot stuff stopped. But it took an outsider, a relative outsider coming in and seeing that to actually
Kind of makes you wonder, where was your mom?
Yeah, I know. But,
people do as best they can.
They
she
do.
had some kids.
Yeah. There were a ton of us. And I think, partially she was oblivious to it. And part of it was, he never did it in front of her, he never did it in front of her. It was always, but anyway, my point in bringing all that up is even saying that to you now is hard to say that I was emotionally abused. That's, it's just a tough one to get out. And then, it's also, how are the people close to me going to respond when they hear me say that, especially if it, pertains to a family member. And, I'm a guy who writes, and I've only just begun over the last year to start to write about this a little bit. And I've gotten some response, it makes people uncomfortable to hear about this. The people who love me most.
The people that you mean?
Yeah. It's hard to look at. So yeah, there are a lot of, stigma is huge in a lot of areas around our own well-being, emotional well-being, mental well-being. But that's been a tough one for me to put that out there that, I've been emotionally abused because, why I went there is you were mentioning how these things affect us and our decisions as we go forward in life, because, I've lived out the life of a adolescent who was emotionally abused. I've not always been as assertive as I would have been if I grew up in a healthier environment. I didn't always feel as deserving of things as I might have if I grew up in a healthier environment. I've had this thing going on that I still go there in my brain a lot of times, that especially in romantic relationships, for some reason, well, I don't want to bother her. I don't want to impose. Like, I don't want to burden this person, which, you know what? That's no way to live. Like, we're all deserving. We're all deserving of love and attention and all that stuff. But, because of how I was groomed, by certain people in my world, I was treated like an imposition. So, we carry this stuff forward in life. And for me, this is why I go to therapy every week. And I go to therapy every single week,
Yeah. That's
and
good.
It is. And you know what? I mean, sometimes when I tell people that, they'll either think like, wow, that's a waste of money. Or if you're going all this time, she must not be doing something right, which is all just BS, I mean, it's, we're complex, and excuse me. We're complex, and things that, I mean, I learned something about myself in therapy last week that I wouldn't have learned if I hadn't built this therapeutic relationship with this person and we hadn't kept digging. But it had to do with why I have this type of relationship with someone who's important to me in my life. And I unraveled it. I have a better understanding of why the dynamics are what they are between us now. And I feel better. So why would I deprive myself of that? And I think one of the things I talked about in that episode with her, Donna Marks is her name, is that, I'm a sober guy. I've been, this week coming up on 23 years, which is at this point half of my life that I've been sober.
Good for you.
But I think one of the real gifts that I have had in my path is that I've been fascinated by this stuff, going deeper and learning more about myself and what makes me tick and all that. I'm fascinated by it. I really am. And I don't think everyone is. So I get why that person might not want to be in therapy for every week for a year or whatever. But for me, it's like I'm being good to myself by doing it. It's not something negative. It's something definitely positive. So yeah, I'm talking an awful lot again for the guy who's not the guest. You're the guest.
You have your chance tomorrow.
I guess so. But
you're saying good stuff, and
yeah. I mean, ultimately, this is all about helping somebody else, and that's why you're doing what you're doing, right? I mean, because, you're saying what that 18-year-old needed to hear, right?
Yep. Precisely.
And
I think, honestly, back in the day, the media is what really put the stigma on mental health by advertising insane asylums and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and The Shining, and making it look like people get lobotomies and electric shock treatment all the time. And honestly, it's not even like that. People come into my office, they sit on a chair or couch, wherever they want, and we just talk. And it kind of unravels itself. And of course, therapists are trained to know what to look for, but never is there judgment in my office. Never is there any discrimination. It's confidential. In fact, if I I think that some people don't realize that it's better to talk to a therapist than a friend, because a therapist is legally confidential,
Yeah.
mandated to be confidential. So it's not like they can gossip. And that's what's important, is to be able to be real with somebody else, with one other person, but especially ourselves. And a lot of times we put on a fake mask in order to appease others. And it's hard to be real with others when we can't be real with ourselves, kind of like what you said in the beginning about because of shame or guilt or fear of embarrassment. But when we realize we can be honest with at least one other person, we start becoming more real with ourselves and seeing things in a different light. And more often than not, when it's not addressed, when our past or our guilt, our shame, things like that are not addressed, it leads to addiction. It leads to alcohol use. It leads to comfort overeating. It leads to things, or over exercising, or starving ourselves, or things for control. And it's not a nice way to live. We're not being nice to ourselves and not being healthy. And we're not using our time wisely in this life. And it just makes matters worse. Sometimes the aftermath that is inflicted upon people that experience something hard, especially in childhood, gets worse than the trauma itself at times.
Well, because
almost.
What happens is we re-traumatize ourselves. I mean, for me, and I've seen this so many times with other people, is that, all those negative messages that I was getting, it's like software that was installed, and I mean, I took on those messages myself. I didn't need the perpetrator anymore. I became the one giving myself these messages repeatedly. And part of getting better has been about replacing those messages with positive messages, because our brains get wired with this stuff. It becomes, they become neural pathways. So yeah, man.
So there's so many things like that. And our minds are so powerful that if we don't nourish our minds, I would rather be with a broken leg than a broken mind. I would rather 1,000%, because our minds are precious. I mean, our brains are so powerful. It could splinter into several personalities to protect us. It can recover from the most traumatic events, but it can also launch us into anxiety, depression, things like that if we don't nourish ourselves, and it can make things very hard for future days.
Yeah.
So we have to take care of our mind, body, and spirit just the same. It's balance.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, I mean, we need more compassion for ourselves and for each other, because, like, for example, denial, which is something you often encounter when working with people who have mental health or substance abuse issues. It's an ego defense. There are other ego defenses, and you'd think about that, what they're called. I mean, it's a protective measure that our psyche is employing. Because, sometimes the denial's so deep, because if I experienced all of this all at once, I might not survive it. So it's a sign to go deeper and dig out some of this stuff, because, you mentioned one of the good reasons to talk to a therapist rather than a friend is the confidentiality factor, but also there's a lot to be said about talking to someone who's not the least bit invested, and emotionally or in any other way, who has complete objectivity. One of the things that I ran into, I'm divorced. I don't know. I shouldn't describe myself that way. I'm a single guy. I was married. I went through a divorce. But part of that was, couples couples counseling and, trying to work stuff out. I did everything I possibly could to try to work it out. And that meant going to a whole bunch of different therapists. And, what really ended up making a difference to me, because my ex-wife's a therapist, I'm an addictions counselor. We both knew all these people. So in our minds, like, well, we have access to the best. We should go to the best, And so we, like, I'm thinking of one guy in particular who I saw privately, and he was a colleague, and there was he was a colleague first. And so there was initially a discussion about, are you okay with the boundaries here? Can we keep it separate? And we like kind of had an agreement, and then that worked out fine. But then eventually it was, both of us went. My ex-wife and I both went together. And what I learned in hindsight is, we did that with 2 or 3 different therapists who each of us knew. And, finally toward the end, it was like, I don't care who we go see as long as neither of us know them. Because what those people weren't able to do, as great as their intentions were and as talented as they are, what they couldn't do is leave their own perceptions of us as human beings at the door and look at the dynamics of the relationship and what was happening. They were too invested in who we were as people. One of either they knew me or they knew her or they knew both of us, and they had their own idea, liked us, had their own idea of who we were as human beings. So how could they possibly just look at the relationship and see what's happening and kind of break it down? So that's when things started getting better. When we went to someone who didn't know, I was like, I don't care who it is. You choose him or her, whoever you want, I'll go see. My only requirement is that neither of us know them. And then what happened is the guy started like pointing stuff out. And I started to learn what I needed to do differently, and I started to change. And ultimately that, kind of was the beginning of the end. But you know what? I'm better now. I'm happier. She's happier. Everything's better now because we got the help that we needed, which is kind of the underlying point to all of this, is that we got help. Mm-hmm. People need help. And, relationships are a whole other thing to me, which kind of drives me crazy in this culture, because as a kid, I felt all this pressure, to be married and have kids. And like, if you're not hitched by the time you're in your mid-20s and you're not beginning to have kids, like, something's not right. There's something wrong with you. So we have this societal pressure. I mean, I think the way women experience it a lot is people asking, why aren't you married yet? Which implies there's something wrong. Which, I guess could be true, but it's definitely not a rule. Like, some people don't get married because they don't want to get married.
Or they just haven't met the right one.
Right.
Some people could be fishing for you. They're trying to figure out if or why, or if you're available.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
But maybe your perception of that question could have caused you to perceive it the way that they're digging instead of.
I guess I hear from young women that's a question that they get that really pisses them off. That, why aren't you married yet? Because it implies and it could come from either gender. It could come from, but there's this implication like, something's off here because you're not married yet. But it goes to, we're not good at relationships in our culture. Nobody taught me how to be a partner. Nobody really taught me how to be a husband or what, I mean, I saw what I saw. And I'd like kind of figured out what I thought wasn't good enough about that. And I tried to be better. I did the best I could. But I also kind of thought, well, just because I want it to work, it's going to work. But that's not how life is. I mean, I think that's part of maturity, is learning that sometimes things just don't go your way, no matter how badly you want them to. And you can't force it to go your way. Sometimes things just don't work out. But now going back and looking at relationships that I got into over the years, my choices would have been a lot different if I was taught, if was raised in a different environment. And I don't think it's my family. I think it's our culture is not good at helping us learn how to choose partners, be partners. I mean, look at all the divorces in our society. And there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to get married and have kids. And it's just so stupid. I mean, I work with all these young guys in the addiction space, and a lot of times they're 21 years old and they think because they haven't finished college or aren't on the way to finishing college, like they're behind, like, man, when am I ever going to catch up? In my head, I'm like, oh my God, you're 21 years old, but
it's crazy. My office is filled with those kind of people under the age of 30.
Yeah.
Often. And what's funny is, I'm probably going to be starting a group pretty soon on adulting, because the way society is now with instant gratification and the internet and social media and online dating, it makes everything so accessible. It makes divorce easier because you just hop on the internet, find another one. It's easy to cyberbully. It's easy to do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And kids nowadays are getting raised differently. They're scared to become adults. They're not getting taught anything about hard work.
I was scared to become an adult. I mean, I was taught what hard work meant and all that, but I was afraid of becoming an adult. I was afraid I couldn't do it. I mean, that's one of the things with guys. I mean, we need to feel like we measure up.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was scary. Like going through that, that transition into adulthood is really, really hard. No matter what time we're living in, I mean, that just happens to be the way things are now, which is crazy. Really, the whole pornography thing just kind of blows me away because, I think the habits of young people dating now, I mean, I think they're just so much more prone to send naked pictures and stuff like that. And it just would have never happened when I was a kid. People my age don't do shit like that, I mean, they just don't. But younger people do. I've had guys in my office who'd had a phone full of pictures of naked women who sent them pictures, it's crazy. Yeah, it's a wild world, but, yeah, the transition into adulthood, I think that's something that really interests me because I did have a hard time with it. And looking back, I can kind of look at what was hard about it. And I tend to see it through the lens of, transitioning into manhood, which is a topic that I am writing about and spend a lot of time talking about with clients, because, that's manhood, and the meaning of it is something else that's really nebulous in our culture. Like, we have all these strong ideas about what it means to be a man, but we can't articulate them. We don't really know. And it kind of, if you do a go round and ask people what it means to be a man, I mean, you're going to get a lot of different answers from people. There are going to be some consistent themes like being a good provider or, taking responsibility or having a good work ethic, but that's about it. I mean, after that, it could be just about anything. You don't know what it's going to be. Okay, so there's that. Like, we don't know what it is collectively. We don't have a collective working definition of what it means to be a man. Yet, if someone doesn't think I'm being a man, I mean, they're not afraid to, well, he needs to man up. He just needs to get a job. I mean, I hear that stuff from parents all the time. He just needs to be a man. Well, okay. So you're talking about this guy who you did absolutely everything for him his entire life and then sent him off to college. And now he's in addiction treatment because he didn't know how to do anything, because you did everything for him and didn't teach him like you're supposed to as a parent. And now you're saying he just needs to man up. Well, what did you teach him about that? Of course, I don't say these things because they're not ready to hear it, but that's what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. You know, this whole helicopter parent thing. I mean, that's a real thing. And I mean, you look at this whole scandal around these celebrity parents paying for their kids to get into colleges. I mean, what I thought about when I heard about is what it must feel like to be those kids whose parents don't believe in them enough to say, you know what, you're going to be all right no matter what college you get into. Just do the best you can. We're here with you. You know, I mean, instead they were like, we don't believe you can do this, so we're going to rig the system so you get into some decent college because we don't believe that you could do it on your own. I mean, come on. That's a setup for failure, no matter what. You're telling that kid that you don't believe in them. That's what we need. We need our parents to believe in us. We don't need them to do stuff for us. And, you know, and what it boils down to a lot of times is when that parent is doing everything for that child, whose needs are they actually meeting? They're not meeting the kids. What the kid needs is to learn how to take care of him or herself. And a lot of times I think what's happening is the parent it's managing their own anxiety. You know, well, if I just do this, I know it'll be done right. And, you know, or if I just pay this bill, I know it'll get paid. You know, I mean, they're soothing themselves instead of allowing their kids to sink or swim, you know? And if you sink, we're here to help you get back up, but you know, you'll figure it out. That's what they need to hear. We believe in you. Oh yeah. Man, I'm just stepping onto one soapbox after another in this conversation, aren't I? Yeah.
It's a good talk.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to being on your show. And I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Is there anything else you'd like to add or?
No, I just think that what you're doing is doing a great job in educating and keeping people clean and helping them when they need that extra support.
Well, and I think this really goes back to thank you first of all, but this whole stigma thing and the idea of breaking the stigma, it really does kind of go back to the concept of personal authenticity because, you know, it's about, you know, giving yourself what you need and you deserve, and not, you know, being true to yourself and not getting too hung up on other people's thoughts or expectations of us, or which can be really hard, you know, it can be hard. But, you know, I really believe the reason why this whole authenticity thing is important to me is because I can definitely recognize when I started to get off track in life was when I stopped being true to myself, you know, and a lot of times that was to satisfy the people around me or whatever, for whatever reason. But it led to a lot of trouble. It led to a lot of problems. And it's, you know, everything gets, the more true to myself I am, the better my life gets. And I think that's really our real power, is our identity. And, you know, you're definitely living it out with your radio show and your practice, and you're doing good work too. So I'm looking forward to being on your show. And I appreciate you taking the time, Tiffany. Thank you.
Thank you. No problem. Anytime. We can only change the world.
So there you go, Tiffany Wehrner, Moments of Clarity with Tiffany.com. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please be so kind as to leave a review or a rating at Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you access this podcast. You can contact the show via email, thepathtooauthenticity@gmail.com. You can find the show on Patreon, where you can access supplemental content. Patreon.com/thepathtooauthenticity. You can find us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram, both at The Path to Authenticity. So I hope you check out this next little bonus episode where I appear on Tiffany's show. And I hope you come back. So thanks again. Be nice.
Great, honeybee.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.